This is CodingBat Java Array2 countEvens. Return the number of even ints in a given array. Note that the mod operator, which is the percent symbol, computes the remainder. For example, 5 divided by 2, or 5 mod 2 is 1, because 5 divided by 2 would be 2, 2, 4, so 2 goes into 5 2 times, but with a remainder of 1, because it only goes up to 4, 5 minus 4 is 1. So, for example, if we do countEvens, which is the method we're going to be writing here, and there's a 2, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, we're going to return 3 because there's 1 even, 2 evens, and 3 evens. In this one, we do a 2, 2, and 0, we're returning 3 because all 3 of them are even, and in 1, 3, 5, we return 0 because none of those numbers are even, meaning these numbers, 1 mod 2, would not be even. It would be 1. So, let's start by creating a variable to count how many evens there are. So we'll call this evens. It will be an integer because it's just going to be a count. And we'll set that equal to 0. And then when we find something that's even, we're going to increment this evens variable. So we're getting an array. We can tell because of this. It's going to be an array of int. And the name for this variable, this parameter, is nums. So we need to loop through this array. So we'll go ahead and say for int I equals 0, while I is less than nums.length I++. There's our basic setup for a traditional for loop. We're going to set I equal to 0, and that's going to start counting up for us. As long as I is less than the length of our array, we want to increment I. Once we get to the length of our array, we want to break out of this loop, because that means we've then gone through every element in the array. So while we're looping through it, we want to check and see if the current element that we're at, right? We're going through an array. Let's look at this array, for example. If it's 0, it would be this element. If it's 2, it would be this element. If it's 3, it would be this element. 1 would be here, right? 4 would be here. So the length of the array is 5, but the last element is located at 4, and the first element is located at 0, right? We want to iterate through each of those. That's what I will help us do, because I starts at 0, and it goes until we're at the length, right? Until we're at length minus 1, actually, because that's why we have a less than here. So we always access an element in an array by giving the array name, square brackets, and the number of the element you want to access based on 0-based indexing. But we don't want to put a hard-coded number into here because we want to access each element, a different element, for each iteration of our for loop. So we put I, which means I will start at 0, meaning the first iteration nums with I in the square bracket will be equal to the first element in our array. And then when I increments and I is 1, it will then be the second element. When I is 2, it will be the third element, and so forth until we get to the end of the array. So this right here, this statement, nums square brackets I, will be whatever element we're on from 0 to the length, minus 1, for that iteration of the array. So nums I, whatever number we're on in the array, mod 2 equals 0. So if the current number that we're looking at, mod 2 equals 0, that means you can divide it by 2 and have 0 remaining. That is the definition of even. If you have a number you can split exactly in half with no remainder, then it's even. 10 divided by 2 is 5 with no remainders. That's an even number. 50 divided by 2 is 25 with no remainder. That's an even number. This is the mathematical equation for evenness. If we can divide it by 2 and have no remainder, we know that it's even. So if the current number we're looking at is even, we'll open up some curly braces there, then we want to increment our evens variable right here to know that we found an even number. We count it. Just like if you're looking at a list of numbers, every time you see an even one, you're going to hold up another finger on your hand. You're counting the evens. We have to keep track of them with this evens variable. If it's not even, so if this is false, we just don't want to do anything. We want to go ahead and just move on to the next iteration and see if it's even. We just leave it alone if it's odd. At the end, once we get through all of them, so we're outside of this loop now, we just have to return what we counted. So all the evens. So if we run that, we can see that it's all green. We passed all the tests. Now, we can go ahead and refactor this to make it just a little prettier. So let's go ahead and change it up. We're going to use a enhanced for loop. So we'll go ahead, we're going to keep our evens. We still need this variable, we still need to return it. We're just going to change this loop up so it's a little prettier. So we're going to say for int I in nums. So that means for every element we're going to call I in our nums array, we want to do something. What we want to do is say if I mod 2 equals 0, there's our even check right there, increment even, so evens plus plus, right? We want to run that, we can see it all passes, and we can see the code's a little cleaner. It's easier to read this enhanced for loop than it is to read the traditional for loop. And we can refactor it even one step further and get rid of kind of this extra line. Now this is all preference. This doesn't mean it's the right way or it's not. This is a very easy way to read. You're perfectly okay if you keep it like this. But what you can do, just so you can see how a ternary operator works even further, we can say evens plus equals if I mod 2 equals 0. So if it is even, then we will return 1. Otherwise, we will return 0. And this will do the same thing. This is saying if it's even, we're going to add 1. Otherwise, we're going to add 0. On that, we can see that it still passes all the tests. Out of the 3 ways shown here, either one of them is acceptable, and you can choose either one. Whichever one is easier for you to read and easier for you to write.